How you doing?
It's good to see you, Dave Letterman.
That's right. That's right, baby.
I keep on. Well, welcome on behalf of the museum, Brett. Welcome, and I saw you, on when I was talking with Susan, and man, I want to really again emphasize the gratitude I have uh, for what you guys have done and contributed.
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, thank you. But you know, it was a great time doing all that work and participating. I appreciate the all that, but I gotta say, like, kind of flipping it around, man, I'm super excited for what's going on down there in Miami, and I'm just sad I haven't been down there yet. And what you and Kat are doing is what should have been done, and I'm glad you guys are doing it too. You're two of the best people I could think of to be doing that work. So I'm just super psyched about that too,
Well,
man.
it's a community effort, brother. It's not just us. This doesn't
Yeah,
happen, without the community and without his partner, Allison Frieden. They and the artists that support us and our staff, and
of course.
it is a labor of love, as you know what that is. I mean,
No doubt.
our program has been a labor of love for many years.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, gave up a lot of I think Amanda would probably comment on this more than me, but gave up a lot of social life for that thing. But it was well worth it. I mean, the thing about that though is like looking back on it and like I don't want to jump ahead, whatever you want to talk about, but our crimes led to this amazing life that I have now. It gave me a career. It like did all these things for me as well as like introducing me to a whole bunch of people that I'm giving me shout outs in chat there. It's people I like just feel so blessed to have met and have given me so much, just inspiring me through their art or just kindness or sleeping on someone's couch or showing me around their city or whatever it is, man. You know the deal.
No, I do know because I was around with you for many things, and when I lived in Los Angeles, we spent a lot of time together,
No
and
doubt, no
and
doubt.
and and I'm just going to throw this name out there because he was part of our crew, Joe Crowley,
Oh, of
uh,
course.
a good friend. But what as I normally I just want to kind of give people a little bit of background about you. So I'm going to flip this over
Yeah,
as I speak about you, because I'm just going to read a bit about your bio and uh, so people understand who you are. Brett Webb has been actively participating in the graffiti scene since 1988. He has painted walls and other objects from the West Coast to Europe to Asia and many places in between. While attending the University of Southern California in 1993, Brett became one half of the first website dedicated to graffiti and street art crimes. As well, being featured as a panelist at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland and part of the selection committee for the Altoids Curiously Strong Graffiti Project Committee. Never heard of that one. He has spoken at conferences and jams in Switzerland, Portugal, Singapore, and throughout the US. Through his experience gained working at Art Crimes, Brett has led tech projects for organizations like Disney, Facebook, Samsung, MTV, the Smithsonian, Funny Garbage, and Cartoon Network, among the many others. Currently, you reside in San Francisco and have been posting your photos at spraystreet.com. Wow, so there's
no,
a lot to unpack in all of this, and so folks may not know that you and I have known each other for some time and been good friends, and have seen one another through um, the developing technologies, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
the when I moved to LA, I had already been embarking on the website stuff with Kel with voiceoftheghetto.com and Meet 'em in Media, and then of course launching the Style Wars project online. But you
yeah,
were there lockstep with some of this stuff, all the
no doubt.
crazy ideas and ambitious ideas
Yeah.
uh, of how do we push this further. And while you were web, I was more multimedia in those days, which was a new emerging technology as well.
Yeah, yeah, man, no. And we were just figuring it out, right? Uh,
Yeah. And
Uh,
so well, the other thing too is we'll get to the tech stuff, but you
okay,
know, people should know you were a writer too.
a little
So
bit.
I want to share some of your graph and and you know, you grew up, is it Fresno, correct?
I grew up in Fresno. Yeah,
So
yeah,
Fresno
yep,
had a scene, right? And so when you came onto the scene in Fresno,
yeah,
how how did you jump into the game and who was around?
yeah. So Fresno, I mean, one of the things about Fresno that the any b-boys on here will know, is there was actually like a really strong, like popping came from Fresno, and so there's a pretty strong like street dance culture in Fresno, and that along with I think like all the movies and staying Beat Street and all that kind of stuff came in and really like had this sort of street art culture that was there both between you know the gangs, the Latino gangs, as well as so there's tons of writing on the walls that like grew up with, and the same styles you would see in like LA, that kind of thing, and then also this like dancing culture, like really like for us, like the package hip hop thing kind of like happened, right? Like it was a time that when it all came to us was like packaged up and worked for us. I can say I'm kind of glad that that piece is pixelated out because it's not the tightest thing in the world, but it was already there, and there were some folks. I just remember this guy Scribe had like a New York hand style and was up everywhere. So there was already some like blueprint that was there for me, and I got super lucky. Also in like '86 or '87, I got to go to New York for a trip for school, and I got to ride the subways, man. And like it's funny, the only photos I have, which that was a pretty good time for trains right then. The only train photos I have are insides, which like I think goes a little bit to show kind of where my mind was at. And I have no outside pictures at all, like no pieces on the outside. So anyway, so like between this guy Scribes, which just being a big influence on like where is this dude? Like who is he? Why is he up all over the place? And then the like the gang stuff that was there. So sort of on the simpler side, that just like really influenced me, and seeing the same stuff repetitively over and over again was just huge for me. And
And
there were
and
some dudes. There were some dudes piecing. I'm gonna just shout out to like GTL NIST, who's still super active. Just crushed it. Just crushed it. So yeah, still crushes it.
and so given that you were just kind of seeing it in Fresno, did you make your way
Yeah.
into Los Angeles at all?
Yeah. So then, well, yeah. I mean, my family always kind of traveled around, even if it was like camping or anything or whatever. But I would go down to Disneyland or whatever. So you'd go into LA through LA, and you'd see you'd see a bunch of stuff on the freeways or whatever. And so that just always like clicked with me, just always stuck. And then I was lucky enough to go down to school, like in my bio at USC in '90, and that like especially going to school at USC, which I'm so glad it was like it wasn't my first choice or whatever. It just for some reason I wanted to go to LA, but being in South Central at that time period was like the best thing I could have done for a bunch of reasons. Specifically graffiti, which maybe my parents weren't as happy
Yeah.
about, but whatever.
Yeah, let me interject for a second. Folks, I'm really
Yeah,
sorry about the bandwidth issue and the blurriness. I wish there was more I could do about that, but it just seems that it's just such a crappy connection. Is if the if if Brett's coming in clearly, please give me a thumbs up. But if I know that the images might not be translating very well, but let me ask you this: when you started
yeah,
writing, in
yeah,
we see this in the early piece, and again,
yeah.
I always talk about how graffiti really is so much a child's play, and it's so much of the child's imagination.
Hmm.
And you chose the name Shmoo. And for those
Yeah,
and for those that may know, Shmoo was a character, right? There was a
that's right.
cartoon,
Yeah,
Saturday morning cartoon character.
totally.
Um, and tell me why you chose that name.
I was really he was in Captain Caveman, which I just loved as a kid. That was my jam on Saturdays. And then so it's something that just kind of stuck with me the whole time. And then part of kind of wrapping back up to that the story about popping at Fresno, uh, the way Fresno dealt with segregation is they bust people in to different parts of town. So, being a white kid, I got bussed over to the black side of town, which was phenomenal for me. I was playing basketball, and I played basketball at Edison, which this is like really details that no one cares about, but proud of Edison. And Edison won more games of any team west of the Mississippi in high school basketball. And I was one of the few white guys that got to play there. And so we all had nicknames, and like they were trying to come up with nicknames for the white dudes, and Shmoo kind of stuck for me. And so it just kind of all was wrapped into that.
I
That
would
kind of thing.
imagine if they called you Larry Bird, you would have started writing Bird.
Bird would have been better. You can see, I don't think you've ever seen me play basketball, so you know where my
But
basketball
you
career
also
began.
chose another name, right? Rad. And here's a
Yeah,
piece, a more contemporary piece. Um,
yeah.
and let's talk about West Coast graffiti and what was, now you start getting better at graffiti
Yeah,
and noticing it while you're in university.
yeah.
Who were the early writers that you were connecting with at that period?
Well, I actually made a big connection. It's funny. When I went down to school, I made a connection to, at the same time, Lord's crew in Bay Area, old school Bay Area crew, had made a connection of some friends in Fresno. So then we made the connection, and so I was one of the first Lords down in LA. And then right around that time, I just rolled up. Posh was just telling me the story the other day. I rolled up on Posh. He was doing a piece, time he was CBS and BTP crew. He's down with Lords. He was doing a wall on Melrose. That was the spot for CBS especially. And I just rolled up on him and said, "What's up?" Because he'd been doing these really cool tank characters, these military characters. And then through that, like I very quickly synced up with Rob One, who was like very quickly became a great guy to be around. I don't want to say like he was the tightest friend of mine, but we spent a lot of time together. And oh man, that's like a heaven I did above the 110. That was a good adventure right there. But yeah, I hooked up the CBS dudes, and Bleak definitely was like he's still one of the homies. And then just through that, like then the network started expanding from there a little bit more. And another thing too, I think you know B-Boy Summit started to happen a little bit after that, and that was amazing because then you just got to connect with even more people because it was like a central kind of easy thing to connect with people. I'd say too, like earlier than that, when the hip hop shop was still when Hex still had the hip hop shop in LA, over on Melrose, that was an amazing place to connect with people and just go in and just first of all, connecting with Hex first of all and seeing that worldwide like inspirational art, and then everyone else would come through there, right?
So
It was a
in
connection
that
spot.
in that early period,
Yeah,
when you were writing and going to university,
yeah.
what was your interest? What was your trajectory in terms of academics?
I was a computer science major, and the thing about that is that like my uncle worked at IBM. He was just a huge influence on me as a person. He gave me one of my first computers, and he always sort of allowed me to play around with going online. This is like, Susan was talking about 1200 baud modems. This is like way earlier than that, and BBSs and stuff like that for anyone that is familiar with like the real old school pre-internet kind of stuff.
And then BBS is an acronym for.
Bulletin board systems. And so I got BBSs and was just all into that sort of pre-online culture. And it shared some kind of similar stuff with graffiti too, like this little bit of rebelliousness and just sort of adventuresome, you know, navigating through systems that you know, maybe you're not always supposed to get permission to or whatever. But it was just open. It was an open thing, and so I was doing computer science and actually pre-art crimes, and how I connected with like Eros, New Wave, Peter from Funny Garbage was I was running a mailing list of all the folks that were online. So folks from Graffiti, and we just kind of privatized the conversation a little bit on a mailing list. I think Todd was on there, Reese, some other folks too, and that was like the beginning of like, oh, this is going to be a bigger thing, you know, than like the zines were or whatever other ways we connected people remotely.
And so, given that you were studying computer science and you realize, like, wait a minute, this thing, the internet, is about to blow up.
Yeah,
Um, Susan mentions that you reached out to her, and
yeah.
what was your first impression of what she was doing?
Well, it was interesting. You know, the web was like just starting to happen, like she said. It was very, very early, and so everyone was kind of like looking at it and trying to figure out what was happening and what it was going to be. At the time, I think like you know, the NASA had a site. There was like some other kind of more scientific stuff. There wasn't a lot of art stuff happening. I don't know if anything was happening online. And this is like pre-wired even. So just like super early days. And I I thought it was interesting, and I was super curious who this person clearly wasn't a writer. Um, you know, was putting this stuff online, but also like she had the blueprint, right? Like it was she figured it out, and and Susan wasn't going to talk about this, and you're going to ask her, but Susan's like a very influential in usability on the web, and has worked with like the leaders, the greats in that industry, and that's why our crimes survives to this day, and is, you know, like she said, accessible to all these places that have a hard time getting online. And so being a technologist, like it made sense what she was up to. Um, and some of the photo choices or whatever, I was a little confused about, but whatever. It was, it was a fun time, and it was like, how do we play along? I always had that mindset of just jump in and support and figure out what we can do to participate. So she had me working very quick, on, helping her with stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the kind of the parallels even back then to me when I first discovered it. I had no idea what networking was, but then I started realizing, and I think I've said this before in interviews, that I saw it similarly to the New York City subway map, right?
Mhm.
This concept of transportation and uploading and offloading and something being seen, right, on the trains. And I thought, you know what, this is the most amazing layup ever in the world. Wait till people figure this out.
Yeah, totally. Well, you've always been that. You were the one that kind of like turned me on to the thinking of, and this is a lot about when you talked about Voice of the Ghetto, and that work in Media that you were working on of graffiti's always, relied on technology, whether it was, invented technology through like making your own markers and inks and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
through like you've always said, like you just said, of utilizing, the most expensive gallery in the world that's ever created, the train system, New York City train system, which was a phenomenal communication tool that I don't think anyone even realized how powerful that was when it started. Right? That was coincidence almost. But yeah,
Yeah, it was one of those things in LA when we first met that the we were pretty lofty, weren't we, about what we thought the internet was going to be and could be, because at one point it wasn't just about the internet. It was like, okay, well, let's publish on a floppy disk, and then it was just like, well, let's publish on a CD. So whatever came up, we were like, well, let's put graffiti to it.
yeah, totally, man. I'm still waiting to do something like a Skyrider piece, big train. No, but that's how it was. I don't, it's funny. There was so little of that. I shouldn't say it, it was around, magazines like Mondo 2000 and these things that were like sort of formulating what this was going to be like. Like you said, floppy disks and, videograph, like with videotapes, that kind of thing. Um, but like once the web happened, man, all that stuff was like, it was over, right? Like it was time for this thing. It was the
So
best thing.
once it did happen, what was the
Yeah.
workload for you and Susan in terms of being able to kind of maintain this archive?
Well, let's just say that I never finished my degree at USC. So but part of that was
Was it on account of the project?
it kind of was. I mean, there's another part to that story too, because the web happened, and I was using university computers to help on our crimes, right? So I'd be in the lab doing this stuff because that was the fastest connection. It's where you had the best machines, all that kind of stuff. And so I was sitting in the lab one day, and it was a really fancy lab. It was like the hottest computers at the time, and the PR department was coming through, and they're like, "What are you doing? Like, what's that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's this thing I'm working on. It's called Art Crimes. It's documents graffiti." And through that, just happened to be working on it there. Newsweek actually did a story on Art Crimes, a little tiny story, right?
I remember that.
But it was enough to like propel and also legitimize a lot of the stuff I was doing in my parents' eyes, which was pretty cool. And then also the university employed me then after that. So even though I could have finished my degree for free, I just I just was working on art crimes all the time, and then working on admission stuff for USC and different things like that, which plays into another story that Susan got into. I'm gonna move around a little bit for a second,
Sure, sure.
but right around this time, I don't even know if you were around in LA yet or not, but GK.
I arrived there permanently in '95.
Okay,
I
so
did 5 years.
it's right around this time. I feel like you were there. Anyway, GK had just gotten busted by this dude Randy Campbell, the highway patrol officer, and GK was like, it was a big case, man. I don't even know. He did time and big fines. It was bad news, right? And so, but some stuff came out on that case of like how this highway patrol officer did some like crazy stuff. He used his own personal car or something. I don't even remember. There was like some sketchy details. So I popped off on online about this, actually on Alt Talk Graffiti, and just said, "Oh man, this dude Randy Campbell is trying to go for his own fame, and look at him appearing on all this media and all this stuff." And dude, the next day, he shows up at USC and tries to get me fired. And so I don't know this happens. But the next day, 2 days later, I get called into the dean's office, and the dean is like reading me the riot act, man. He's like, "You've done all this great work for this university, but man, graffiti is horrible, da 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 da." Like laying into who do you think you are, like writing on other people's stuff, all this, like it was crazy. I was like, "Oh man, this is it. My life's over. My whole my whole deal is done." And then he stops, and Joe Allen, he's passed away a few years ago, dean of admissions at USC, and he says, "But I'm going to tell you a story." He's like, "I fought the war, the Vietnam War, and the feds planted a bunch of stuff in my apartment, and I did time. He did a year in prison for a bunch of fake license plates that the feds had planted in his office." He's like, "So I told those guys to get lost, and they can't tell me, what to do with my employees." He's like, "You just got to be careful." And so then, through like a crazy thing, I just want to shout out this too. The FF and ACLU like had my back right away, and the ACLU is like, I got in touch with the ACLU director in LA at the time. They're like, "Do you have anything at your house?" And I was like, "Yeah, I run a website with all these archives. Like, get it all out tonight." So my buddy Tarek loaded up the truck and got rid of all of it that night. That was a crazy evening.
So did anyone show up at your door?
No one ever did. No, man. No, it was I don't know. I guess they knew they didn't have a case.
We
I know
touched.
that yeah.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
with Susan, we touched base on that, right? The implications of publishing your work online, and again, for some anyway, um, yeah, you're kind of pulling your own card by like implicating yourself with a crime. But there are particular statutes in place that you have to be seen and caught in the act and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's no surprise to me that they would target you for you know in that way through the website.
I think, I think I can't speak for Susan, but I mean, I think our fear was always much more on the side of they could make your life a real pain, more than like, are we really going to go to jail for anything? Or anything? Like, that's probably not going to happen. But yeah, that was more the fear, just like, some vigilante or whatever, or some cop goes crazy. So
So Brett, as you're
yeah.
seeing the internet grow and mature,
Hmm.
um, and given that Art Crimes has maintained its low bandwidth profile, you didn't do Flash, you didn't do Macromedia Director, you really didn't do JavaScripting and things dynamic interfaces,
Yeah, yeah,
which in the end proved to be kind of genius given the bandwidth issues we were facing in those times, but also that those technologies are dated technologies.
yeah, totally. I mean, I think this comes from, Susan and I were both pretty nerdy, and she really just championed this through her usability work, and also, if there's anyone from Funny Garbage on here, I was always championing standards-based approaches to design and development, which is, designers don't always want to do that, but the point being, you want to worry about everyone getting access, especially, I think even more so for something like this, it's more of a cultural thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
who is it? Who is it? Why would we make the decision to put these barriers up to all this great art? Really, we just wanted to. We didn't say this outright, but you know, Susan talked about this a little bit. The goals are really about like giving artists opportunities and to take some of the stigma away from the art in general, just to make it a little bit safer space. And that wasn't just it wasn't just us that did this, but looking back, like I think things like those technology decisions, or also she didn't talk about this either, but we didn't put a lot of like tags and throw ups or like bombing stuff on the site. Like we intentionally kept it a little clean, a little easier to digest for everyone, both from the technology side as well as the content side. And
Yeah.
that was always decision,
I mean, you know what? Today, when I went on, I was surprised to see certain things, right? Like the Berlin Wall images, the
Hmm.
helicopter, the diversity that was already in play in the relationship between graffiti and street art.
Hmm.
Um, as you started seeing street art come up in the way it had, um, did you have a particular interest in promoting it, or did you remain kind of loyal to the style writers or the writers of the community?
I mean, I think so. I think one of the reasons we got along early on also is I've always been much more interested in letters and wild style, and like you know me becoming friends with you was just like even more reinforcing to that, and you getting access to like rock stars and all that kind of like knowledge that RTW, all that kind of stuff that you like, you just allowed me to like into that world. So I mean, I guess like you'd say I'm a traditionalist. Like when I do my own work, like I still don't paint characters. I don't, do any of that kind of stuff that lends itself to more street art. But I'll say this, like street art, I think what I did see, I think the first person I saw that was like, there was two things actually. Twist doing those screws in San Francisco, and like I'm not saying he was the first person to do it, but like it clicked with me of like, oh, you can be a bomber and you can do this kind of like conceptual stuff, and you can have a gallery kind of thing going on. And and also Cost and Revs with their wheat pasting, who had done traditional graffiti, but were doing this other kind of thing. And I also Shepherd Fairey with Obey Giant with Obey stuff too. Like it started like clicking of like, oh, this is something that can like people that aren't going to get into tags or like or the sort of grittier stuff that interests me more. It's a way for them to kind of understand it a little bit more and sort of swallow it, and then maybe look at some of the wild style stuff.
But as a
I just
publisher,
yeah
as a
yeah
publisher,
yeah.
did you did were you inclined to promote it or just kind of sideline it?
I was always, it felt to me like there was limited time in what I could do. So I was always going to go all out on trying to get like style writers like as much shine as they possibly could. Um, and, um, that's not like dissing the street art stuff at all or any of that. It just was like, that was my focus. And that was where, that was more my interest, of, because I felt like the street art stuff on its own was going to get its own sort of play. It's going to like do its own thing. I didn't think it needed as much sort of uh, I don't know, attention or whatever at that point. Arkham's already getting a name. We're getting like press. We were doing monthly things with Wired. In the back, like it was starting to get like mainstream enough that I felt like let's just push style writing as much as we can.
Yeah, and you started doing something really interesting, doing the interviews, right? You
Mm.
started doing interviews. You started promoting events. You guys promoted that style battle I had, me versus the world.
That was awesome, man. Yeah, yeah.
But that was kind of it was interesting because again there wasn't a lot of people. It was still new. It was just still new, and it was just fantastic what came in and just started. I think for me, I when that happened, I had I really started digesting and realizing how much better the world, particularly Germany, was getting at style writing. And I showed one of the pieces here. I remember you brought was it Stone
That's
to
right. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, you brought Stone to my apartment, and he gave me all these drawings from Scum and all those guys, and it was
yeah.
really it just opened a whole new world to me about Europe and graffiti. And but we, thank God, Art Crimes was there because now we had kind of insight to see what Lumit and Dime and others, Wesp and all these guys from Germany were doing.
Totally. No, well, I mean, I mean, that was your vision too, right? It was the most audacious thing, saying mayor against the world. But it was, it was a really good hook, right? Of like exactly what you said. And it was the exact connection. It like got people out of the woodwork.
Right.
A way to get them to participate that might not have participated. Like it's not clear to me Stone or those guys would have like reached out necessarily. Um, you know, but then allowed us to connect with them, and yeah, man, that was the connection,
Right,
right?
because it
The
wasn't.
German dudes.
I think we were clear that it wasn't about being arrogant, so to speak. It was about engagement, right?
Hmm.
And that was the thing that that's the ethos of Art Crimes, right? It's engagement, and
That was the hope.
yeah, and and that the fact that it's when you if you go there now and you go down to the list, whether it's USA and then Europe and the rest of the world, you see countries, and states within countries. I mean, it's quite phenomenal to imagine that this is our world in such a short span of time.
Yeah, man. I mean, and like I said, it changed my life profoundly, and I'm sure this happens for all kinds of folks. They get involved in some sort of like stumble into some sort of global project, whether they're leading it or not. But directly resulted in me living in New York for a decade, and it was purely because of all these connections, and part of that's meeting you and spending time and just learning more about New York and the history. And I realized at some point, like, I got to go out there. I gotta go spend some time and like really dig into the history. And I,
Yeah,
I was lucky enough to do that,
and it was interesting because we met in Los Angeles. You come to New York. We're hanging out again, and you go to work with Peter Girardi, who I went to Eros and who I went to school with at Art and Design, and
Yeah,
he was
yeah,
also an early a technology head, and Kel and I, uh, would always talk about technology and interactive technology, and he started a business, and we started a business at that time. And
yep.
he started employing graffiti writers, and we started teaching graffiti writers how to use technology.
Right.
Up at Funny Garbage, it was you, Sub, and Reese up there. And I happened to have been with Code and Theory, a new company I was helping, these kids I was helping out, who
Yeah.
ultimately became the companies. I won a WEBB with them, which was a big deal, and it was for graffiti, right? We
Yep.
were just
Yep.
like, making
So
an impact in technology with graffiti at the highest levels. That's like the Oscars of technology.
yeah.
But that these companies would become very, very successful, and Code and Theory would, off of the back of Style Wars, would become a humongous success, one of the most important agencies in the world at the moment.
Yeah.
We had no idea how technology, our interest in graffiti and technology, what that would take us, right? Because when you were there with Funny Garbage, you spent what, like how many years with them?
It was about a decade or off and on.
A
Yeah.
decade, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And tell us about Funny Garbage and some of the work they produce that people may be familiar with.
I mean, I think the stuff that's like that people would most know that would be on here would be the Dondi book, which is one thing. That was amazing. But more on the and also something else that wasn't web based, although most of our work was web or interactive based. Crank anchors was something, that was really Todd like designing
Yeah.
those those characters, and that was so much fun, as well as just a ton of site. We did tons of work for Cartoon Network on their original site, as well as games every week, animations all the time. You can see tons of Todd's animation work on
Yeah.
those on that
Yeah,
site
and
back in the day.
you guys work with me and Henry on the Star Wars double DVD release.
That's right. That's right. Man,
That
I
was really
couldn't remember
important.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And man, yeah. And then I don't know, people don't care about this much, but we built some wall. We had some walls up above, man, and
Yeah,
getting to paint with so many people on those walls was just like, yeah, it was the best. Just getting so much, with all your heroes and all this kind of stuff. Every day we could just go up and bust pieces out. That
yeah.
was that was
I'm
amazing.
having a flashback that you guys brought me up there, and I think I painted a shy piece.
That sounds about right. Yeah, yeah, man. There's so many. I mean, like seeing chain pieces. Like I can't even remember all the people. A lot of AOK dudes came through there, obviously because of Todd. And yeah, just it was endless. It was endless. It's just getting to paint with Sub and Eros too, right? Chris
Yeah,
and Pete all the time.
yeah,
That
yeah.
was amazing. So yeah,
So after that, and you're
yeah,
you're you're kind of moving on from art crimes, and again, you start using your voice to um, talk to people about this culture and educate them around the world, and of course the impact of art crimes. Uh,
mm.
it, tell me a little bit about that, about the role shift, kind of as ambassador.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just like part of getting old and willing to talk about it. When you're more active as a writer, right? It's like stuff that you don't want to put yourself out there as much, right? So and then getting to do things like it was funny. I got asked to talk in Singapore at the National Gallery, and it was supposed to be about technology. So of course I started talking about graffiti because you're in Singapore, right? Like
Of
so,
course.
I was like I could like put this together somehow. So I talked about branding and graffiti, and showed a lot of things like JA tags and how that's really about branding, and then and also just trying also to like try to do things like take it back to technology side and talk about like Katsu's drone stuff, right? Like this is the future of it. Like it's primitive right now, obviously, but but this is the future of it. And and there's like government officials there in Singapore, and just like in their head of like, guys, come on, you got to embrace this, or if you're going to fight it, it's just going to get worse, right? And just sort of trying to show that it is a cultural, like it's a youth movement, it's a cultural. I say that as an almost
Yeah.
50-year-old man, but it's important culturally, and like at this point, there's no denying that it's worldwide and it's uniting all these folks, and everyone wants it commercially, so how can you like frame it in a way that lets them understand like kind of where it came from, give them a little bit of that, and sort of like not just let it be this glossy, shiny thing that I'm proud of too. Like, I'm proud of the commercial aspects that have come out of all this, but I think that's important to me, and
Yeah.
just to remind people that like we had to invent our tools, and we had to like it was a lot of effort back in the day to like get this done. It wasn't so easy to go to the wall, the
Right.
permission
And
wall.
given that you're a bit removed from it now, can
Yeah.
you look at it objectively and say that yeah, it's getting better or worse?
I don't know, man. Like there's some things. Maybe I'll take it a different way. There's some things like there were some moments. Let's say there's some moments. There was one moment when etching cream got really big in San Francisco, like really, really big, and I came out and I got some of it, and I gave it to Sace, and that was one of those moments where I was like, why would I do that? Like, you see the next week, it was just everywhere. Like,
I
uh,
know.
you,
Rest in peace, Sace. He was a friend of yours
no doubt.
and
Yeah.
a prolific bomber in New York.
Yeah, maybe a little too much, right? But yeah, no, obviously, and like, now being a little older, it's funny. Like, if someone would come and tag my house now, like, what would I do? I don't know. Like, you got to have mixed emotions about it,
It's
right?
not about what you would do; it's what Amanda would do.
No doubt, no doubt. But there'd be part of me that would kind of smile, right? Like, there's a part of it just kind of laugh and be like,
That would
okay,
be
all
your
right,
karma.
that's definitely my karma. No doubt, no doubt. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I mean, how do you feel about that? Like Museum of Graffiti, like there's definitely some negative aspects to this.
Um,
I'm gonna flip it on you a
it's
little bit.
it's interesting because our mission is twofold, right? Oh, well, severalfold, let's just say. Historic, right? There's the historic. We tell you the story the minute you walk in, and because we have to contextualize it against everything that's outside and the windward walls and all of that. And part of that is like, look, you have to understand this comes from, New York City at a certain time and Philadelphia at a certain time, and that it's young people at play looking for identity and using very remedial tools like pens and small markers and spray paint. But this story kind of just grows from there, right? From all the things that the pioneers have done in the 70s that laid the groundwork for me and others to push forward, right? And I can see in my own career, and I love telling that story, but how I paid attention to that very early on. And then you see slowly how the culture evolves into galleries and to all these other new spaces. But more importantly, we create a space for artists to have contemporary exhibitions in context to the history, right? And we are embracing technology. We do the art talks. We're doing like these virtual walkthroughs of the museum and embracing technology because especially in this day and age and this time, it's unfortunate but also opportune that these talks, right, and getting together with people that I've known for many years that have had a profound influence on me, and these friendships and these stories that people don't know about us as a community, right, and the success stories and the challenges, and how we've managed to adapt over time, and you know, uh, as you speak and say, hey, these are the places I've ended up, in Singapore and the government, and you could never put we could have never imagined that before, right?
No,
It
no,
sounds too far-fetched. I'm talking to a government about graffiti,
right.
and it is something that, again, if if this was a smaller movement, I don't know if we would have arrived there. So I think it's better that it's kind of gotten as expansive as it is. And uh, again, this all leads me to say about the testament to one's legacy for those that were there earlier, those that, when you did art crimes, right, the legacy you leave behind, that is very healthy, contrary to the criminalization of the art form. Yes, yeah, a lot of people start out criminals and then, like become, you know, artists, legitimate artists, business owners, and so
Yeah,
on.
yeah. And the other part of that too, just from the pure art aspect of it, it excites me when you see things like KR or something like that, like just doing drips and like the fact that all the like more acceptable stuff has become mainstream or whatever. It's allowing kind of this more like pure vandalism stuff to be appreciated in a different way too. And the other thing I think about is like just over generations, as we've got a museum now, like we've got all these legitimate kind of institutions or whatever. They're going to come up, and then as writers or friends of writers get more power in the world, it's just going to like become, I don't know, it doesn't have to become completely acceptable. It doesn't have to be completely like mainstream. But I think, how outrageous the penalties and things were in the 90s. Maybe we can just kind of come back from that and like embrace the rebelliousness of it, but not send kids away for years for doing this kind of thing, or just,
Well, it's
you
interesting,
know,
Brett, because it seeps itself in every crevice imaginable, the
mhm,
culture,
mhm,
and that there's no. This is the only creative culture I've ever seen and heard of that has the kind of early adaptation by children, both male
yeah,
and female. And now you're seeing more female writers, which is
definitely,
phenomenal. And they're
definitely.
just as good as the boys,
Oh
and
yeah,
they're making their own mark in the culture.
yeah,
But as I think about that happens on the street, um, you know, it's not my place to, as an older person, like you said, I don't want anybody writing on my house, right? Because of course, wisdom is prevailing there. Like, yeah, home, right?
right,
But the truth is that I love it. I love when I see it on the street, but I
of
also
course.
love it when people thrive and kids who come out of tough conditions, crews like the Tats crews and
Oh yeah,
others
man.
who have made a name for themselves and improve their community.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
love that. I love the kind of support we give one another when we buy each other's work and so on and promote each other's work. And the risk we take with new technologies, that we adapt,
Yeah,
whether it's AR or VR, or
yeah,
whether it's the web.
yeah.
So um, I think this next generation is going to be doing some very interesting things. I'm 3D printing now, and I'm doing VR and all that other
Yeah,
stuff because I'm still curious is how do you apply graffiti to this,
totally,
right?
totally.
Those ideas.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like the writer part. Like the first, the first thing you do with any kind of technology is like, all right, let's go, let's see what a piece looks like. Can I
Yeah.
catch a tag with this thing? Yeah, yeah,
I have a question
absolutely.
for you because
Yeah, yeah.
you code, right? And coding
Hmm,
itself is an art, right?
hmm,
And
hmm.
and and I'm sure we've talked about this in the early days, right? About embedding messages in code and getting up
Yeah,
through code and hacking.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and do you still find any kind of correlation or excitement between code and the kind of graph ideology?
Totally. So in the last like oh, it's been about 7 or 8 years now. I finally started going to DEF CON, big security conference, and like getting into that world. And it's just that like there's such a it's a similar kind of mindset, right? And like and I still get that excitement when someone does embed something that only a technologist could kind of understand or get to or see or something like that. It's kind of it's hard to explain here, but even if it's some it's the same thing with like wild style when you see like when you see something that just blows you away, like some connection or something very subtle, you get the same excitement when someone does something through their code. Like, I mean, it's the same with like reading like a good novel or something when you
Yeah.
just have like the pieces make sense. So absolutely. And then, and there's another part of that too. When you start to think about things like, a lot of manufacturing happens in other places of the world than the US. And undoubtedly there's some spy stuff happening in there. And
Mhm.
that's, there's part of me that gets excited when I learn about those things, right? Like, just to see like how someone undermines the system so blatantly. This thing that's like everyone takes for granted, but it's being undermined by people in this way that sometimes it's a pain in the ass, like when some system goes down or something like that. But at the same time, like, I get it. Like, I get it. It's fun, Like, without that kind of like, without that element, then I don't know. Technology is just stale and boring. So,
Yeah,
um,
it's that hidden subversion,
yeah, totally, totally.
so
Yeah, no,
fascinating. I,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it remains to be, again, given what we've been seeing in the last couple of years, in terms of communications and privacy, and AI.
man,
It's a new frontier,
yeah,
and it it's interesting and scary in one way. In having this conversation with you and Susan today, there's something so wonderful about remembering those humble days, right? Of
yeah,
we weren't worried about that. We were just trying to figure out how to get up on this imaginary space, right?
yeah, man. And that's there's been yeah. So there's a couple things like one. Susan kind of hinted this a little bit, like the the time when everyone was like, "Hey, why are you publishing this? Why are you publishing that?" Like that was a drag for me when I was in New York. At the end, like I got sick of it. I couldn't go to gallery shows anymore. It was like, oh, I don't want to hear about how you were the first person to do this and that or whatever, right? Whatever, man. It was just a drag. And then in the same way, on the technology side, yeah, man, I'm depressed. Like it's we've done some really bad things, and I've played a very minor role in that. But I look back at some of the things that have been done, and it's like, oh, like I'm super psyched to get to do this right now and see people's comments and all that. But like, I don't know, Facebook, Instagram, are they good things for society? I don't know, man. Like, we need to do some real thinking about how these tools are used and how we use them as people. Because there's
Right.
a lot, it's a
Again,
lot deeper.
and again, we feel like this is, given the lockdown, this is opportune for us to
Hmm.
communicate and archive us while we can, because we're facing an invisible enemy. And one
Totally,
day I'm here or you're here and you're not, and you just don't
totally,
know. And
totally.
so it's been a pleasure to talk to you and Susan and all the others that I've managed to have time with, because um, you guys are all special to me. This culture is very special to me, and these moments and these stories, and that this moment that we faced, you know, unlike the '80s with the AIDS pandemic and epidemic, that this is truly phenomenal, and in that young people, or young, really people our age, are being affected by COVID very severely.
Yeah,
And we lost Nick, unfortunately. We've been losing people. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
it's one of the things that um, we care about. And especially at the museum, we're very mindful of that, and
yeah.
creating the spaces and the opportunities for the artists.
Oh man, this has been amazing. Like, Especially when you first started doing these things, it was such a relief to just like get to see all my my heroes and see you talking to them and sort of digging these stories out and their inspirations and all that kind of stuff. Like this is yeah, no, I mean if there is a silver lining, this is the kind of stuff that's coming out of it, right? It's like these
Yeah,
connections that wouldn't be happening.
yeah.
Definitely, it's
And
funny you
and
bring up.
again, and again, we have to acknowledge each other and the seminal things we've done that have had an impact in our communities or and around us.
Yeah,
And so this is, like I have to say, it's been a pleasure, catching up with you, and of course, we'll catch up on the other side of this, but
yeah,
we go back, and I'm so glad you and Susan took time to share uh, such an important story for us about this culture. It's an important link in all of this. So I really, and I say that not as a pun, but like a real link, a real bond. So thank you.
oh man, thank you. It's like the best. Yeah, and like you said, just spending time with you is, I, it's even more of a blessing or something I just try to treasure all the times like this I get with anyone, especially it's like Nick or whatever. People are going away. So,
Yeah.
thanks for doing this for all the people you've talked to. I super
Yeah.
appreciate
So I guess we'll see each other next funk night.
it. Sounds good, man. I'm
I love you, brother. Take care.
down. Love you too, man. Thanks a
Take care.
lot. Later.